Good morning. Can you hear me? Good. Welcome to another day in Glasstopia. By now, you've seen Bryn Athyn's National Historic Landmarks, at least from the outside, and you may be wondering about how, when, and why they were built. For an informative explanation, I recommend the DVD on the Glencairn Museum. It's a well-illustrated, very informative historic account that you can purchase in any of the gift shops, and there's some in the auction too. This morning's panelists will focus on some of the art and artisans associated with these amazing buildings. Michael Cothran will speak on Raymond Pitcairn and his glass collection, Bryn Kolosky on painting techniques at Bryn Athyn, and Kenneth Leap on Lawrence Saint and striated ruby glass. And I will talk on Bryn Athyn's craft, a legacy of Raymond Pitcairn. All right, so let's see if this works. Yes. When the renowned Gothic Revival architect Ralph Adams Cram left the Bryn Athyn Cathedral project in 1917, the editors of the American Association of Architects asked for an explanation of what had happened. I paraphrase the essence of Cram's carefully worded reply in their journal. It noted a combination of two quite separate defects. These were the very unmedieval multiplication of drawings, the introduction of models of everything, the acceptance of suggestions from every source, the determining of nothing until it had been scrutinized meticulously by a plebiscite, varying from week to week in its personnel. In Cram's view, these working methods got on everyone's nerves and ended in catastrophe. The second defect he noted was that at Bryn Athyn, the architect was not the coordinating force and did not have the final and sovereign authority in all matters pertaining to his art. As I show some of the stunning craftsmanship in one of Bryn Athyn's landmarks, Bryn Athyn Cathedral, and I'll talk a little bit about Glencairn, my talk will demonstrate that contrary to Cram's objections, these defects were the very reason Bryn Athyn Cathedral and later Glencairn slowly evolved into the magnificent buildings they are today. There is a Bryn Athyn style or character that arose out of trial and error, multiple revisions, exchanges among the artisans, and careful thought as to how best to convey a variety of spiritual concepts in the very fabric of the buildings. But first, a brief history to put things in context. John Pitcairn, who had amassed a sizable fortune in Pennsylvania oil and railroads and founded Pittsburgh Plate Glass, now known as PPG Industries, was a faithful member and benefactor of a Swedenborgian congregation in Philadelphia. In the late 1800s, this group of idealistic Christians decided to move out of the city and form an autonomous community with its own homes, schools, and social life. John purchased land in the bucolic Pennypack Valley north of Philadelphia, and the group named it Bryn Athyn, which means Hill of Unity in Welsh. A few years before John died in 1915, he and his eldest son Raymond, along with a committee, started the search for architects to help them build a permanent house of worship. John wanted a modest structure without a lot of ornamentation, but Raymond's dissatisfaction with early architectural firms led him to contact Cram, Goodhue, and Ferguson. He felt that this premier Gothic Revival firm would be able to design a structure that could serve as a worldwide center for the Swedenborgian or New Church faith. Whoops. When Cram accepted the commission to design Bryn Athyn Cathedral in 1913, both parties felt they had stepped into the perfect partnership. Their exuberant letters are full of ideas on how to replicate medieval building procedures and therefore construct a cathedral that would rival the European cathedrals they both admired so much. Raymond wrote, "The prospect of having you build the church, which we have so much at heart, has been a delight ever since your visit. And I filled my thoughts long after I should have been asleep last night." Cram wrote, "I really shall have to paint my imagination with iodine every night to keep down the swelling." Cram's book, The Gothic Quest, written in 1907, extols medieval working practices, and in Raymond Pitcairn, he found a patron who was attuned to the excellence of medieval church architecture and the beauty of handcrafted stone, glass, metal, and wood. As shops for the various crafts were erected on the periphery of the building site, sorry, I have to go back. Well, wait a minute. Skilled artisans were hired, as shops for the various crafts were erected on the periphery of the building site and skilled artisans were hired, Cram signed the Pitcairn copy of his book with the words, "Ralph Adams Cram, who at Bryn Athyn has achieved his Gothic quest." One of the oldest members of the Bryn Athyn congregation, who died a few weeks ago at the age of 94, remembered waking up each morning to the sound of the workmen's boots as they walked up the hill from Bryn Athyn train station, past her house, and then up another hill to the cathedral building site. She also mentioned the pleasant ringing sound of the forge wafting over the valley throughout the day. At the height of the building process, there could be 100 men working on various aspects of the cathedral. The shops included one for models. Using three-dimensional models was a working practice Raymond requested from the outset, and reference to them by Cram and Pitcairn proved very helpful in their frequent and detailed correspondence. So it became standard practice at Bryn Athyn to make models for everything from the door handles and keys to the main tower. Models of the main tower ranged inside from maquettes of a few inches to this large one in the center of the screen that Raymond mounted on railroad tracks so it could be easily pulled out and studied in various lighting conditions. When looking through old photographs of the models, it's often difficult to discern a model from the finished product because many of them are quite detailed and were placed in natural surroundings for the photo shoot, such as the one in the lower left. These are some of the extant models now in the Glencairn Museum. Cram's first drawing of the cathedral was based on English cathedrals. Jason Alden's detailed analysis of the prototypes for the Michael Tower traced the design back to St. Cuthbert Wells in Somerset. Early in the design process, Raymond became aware of the studies of William Goodyear on entasis. The subtle curves in classical buildings, and as Goodyear maintained, in medieval churches as well. These optical refinements gave ancient structures the illusion of being higher, more graceful, and ultimately more monumental. It is as if the entire structure took a deep breath and expanded like a rib cage. Few people agreed with Goodyear, saying the curves in cathedrals were because they had bowed with age, but Pitcairn enthusiastically incorporated his theory into every aspect of Bryn Athyn Cathedral in the macro and the microcosm of the building and its contents. Goodyear was at the dedication of Bryn Athyn Cathedral and said it was the greatest event of his life. Let's see. Cram's reply to Pitcairn's excitement on entasis and revising the model to make the Michael Tower higher shows the early signs of an unraveling of their working relationship. In a letter, he says, "We find your criticisms and suggestions very interesting. We congratulate ourselves on the spirit in which you are approaching the problem and on the fact that apparently you look at matters so wholly as we do that, in principle at least, we can endorse all the suggestions you have made. But regarding Pitcairn's idea to make the tower higher, and you can see that there's dark lines on the model, Cram replied, "We are convinced that you do not have to make so drastic and expensive a change as you suggest, i.e. adding 6 to 10 feet in height." And he makes a counter-suggestion. These early letters confirm that what Cram said in the American Association of Architects article. At Bryn Athyn, the architect increasingly did not have sovereign authority. So it was inevitable that Cram would become increasingly irritated as Raymond became more involved. Cram's departure and John Pitcairn's death left Raymond in the roles of both master builder and patron. The demeanor in these images of Pitcairn with Cram and Pitcairn with his artisans captures a shift in attitude from tentative young patron in the presence of self-assured architect to a comfortable leader in the presence of his men. Though not formally trained in architecture or any of the building arts, Pitcairn's involvement with them was in the American tradition of the gentleman architect. He was a man of means, well-educated and well-traveled. He was a voracious collector of books on architecture, and later he designed his own home. From the time he was a child, his mother had opened his eyes to the beauty of God's creation in its many forms and taught him about the world's great architecture. His parents took him to Europe on a regular basis, and he came to love Gothic and later Romanesque architecture, particularly that of Great Britain and France. In his role of master builder, he made good use of a well-trained eye. For example, once when traveling, Pitcairn took note of various outcroppings of rocks, commenting on the intensified color when it was raining. I would like now to show you some of the images of Bryn Athyn craftsmanship in specific media and comment on how Pitcairn and his artisans studied the best traditional Christian forms and then incorporated them into a new context. Pitcairn and his men were particularly attuned to the nuances of color and grain in stone and wood, the patinas and potential textures of different metals, the magical luminosity and superb brushwork of medieval stained glass. Because they wanted certain colors, texture, and properties of stones for various locations in the cathedral, Pitcairn and his artisans visited quarries up and down the East Coast and corresponded with quarry owners across the nation. These photographs show some samples of stones he used in Glencairn. And this wall of the cathedral, temporarily finished in cement and covered with vines until the 1970s, is a sampling of the variety of granite used in the cathedral, mostly from New York State, at least in this wall. The exterior stone of the rest of the cathedral is from a quarry at the base of Cathedral Hill. The road at the foot of this hill is still called Quarry Road. The warm orange sandstone in the interior of the walls is from a quarry near Cleveland, Ohio. These sedimentary rocks show the traces of the sliding and layering and folding of the original sand. Although these blocks were cut by machine, the exposed surface of each one was hand-tooled with diagonal lines. This meticulous attention to the surface of materials is another hallmark of Bryn Athyn crafts. In every medium, the surface is not flat or planed. For example, the floors that make up the 3 aisles in the nave have their natural seam face variations intact. For access in the chancel flooring, the children of Bryn Athyn were enlisted to collect colorful field stones. These also maintain their natural modeled surfaces. These doors from Glencairn and the cathedral show the undulating surface that is typical of Bryn Athyn woodwork. These oak chairs on the chancel, based on Norwegian medieval chairs, have never seen a T-square, compass, or ruler. The grain of their oak pairs well with the rippling design. Okay. Oops. At one time, the Symbolism Committee considered a gold glass mosaic for the floor in the chancel, referring to the sea of glass described in the book of Revelation. But in the end, they used accents of fieldstone with a high quartz content. But glass was used in an innovative manner when it was combined with metal for the west portal. The decades-long evolution of a final design for this door initially looked to the west door of Notre Dame Cathedral, Paris, for inspiration. A letter about the hinge dated April 10, 1918, is a good example of the kind of insights Pitcairn had about the evolution of a given project. Pitcairn wrote to Park Edwards, the chief metal designer who was in Washington, D.C. at the time, "In looking at a large photograph of the Paris hinge recently, I was particularly impressed with the tapering off of the size of the metal as it left the main hinge and worked out through the scrolls to the smaller portions." About a month later, he comments on a model of the hinge. "There are two moldings on the band which may have a trifle too much projection. I should like to see hinges set on a door before this matter is determined." Raymond's choice of material for the hinges was Monel metal, a naturally occurring but also man-made combination of nickel and copper. It has a turquoise green patina when it's exposed to the elements, but if the metal is touched repeatedly, as in door handles, it looks like polished silver. The tympanum of the west door remained empty for years as designs for the rider on a white horse from Revelation went through the drawing and model stages, but were then put aside because they were not quite right. For years, Monel metal vines lay under a plywood panel on top of a drafting table adjacent to the forge. After Raymond Pitcairn's death in 1966, his son Lachlan took on the oversight of unfinished areas in the cathedral and felt that the wooden door made the west entrance look too dark. Made it too dark. He revised a plan to use a PPG product, a car windshield glass, for the core of the door. This is the only place in the cathedral where a brand name is visible, though it's very discreet. It's only visible from the inside. In this photograph, Al Walters, a master craftsman trained in Germany, works on the final design. The lettering was done by a Bryn Athyn College student at the time, Ragnar Boyesen. Lachlan suggested a stainless steel horse and rider that would not develop a green patina, since they symbolize unwavering divine truth. The hinge also uses stainless steel pins, knuckles, and ball bearings, but for practical reasons. They enable each 800-pound door to swing open with ease. The west door is an example of a symbolic program that occurs throughout the building, a visual progression from the simple to the complex as various forms approach closer to the divine. The bottom band of spirals have only a few tendrils, but the vines become filled with increasingly developed leaves and bear fruit as they approach the central image of the tympanum. In this way, the entrance to a house of worship unobtrusively presents a profound spiritual concept, our regeneration and its final flowering. A similar progression is quite noticeable in the grisaille windows on the south side of the building. The shape of the image in the southwest window of the nave, farthest away from the sanctuary, is the most basic, almost seed-like. And in the next two windows, the complexity of design progresses, opening and then finally blossoming with the intricate and more colored window in the southeast. But one of my observant students, Devin Zuber, noticed an even more subtle progression. The southwest window is based on a panel from the chapter house at Salisbury Cathedral. Let's see. The first medieval piece Pitcairn purchased when he turned his attention towards the producing of glass in the cathedral, for the cathedral in the 1920s. Along with the lead lines that are part of the medieval design, the Bryn Athyn window also creates some of the medieval lead repair lines. But why are these faults incorporated? My students came to the conclusion that they represent the early flaws we all have as we begin our spiritual journey, our personal cracks. They noticed that the middle two windows, designed in the Bryn Athyn workshop, also have some faux repair lines, but that the southwest window has none. No repair lines appear in any of the numerous and various size preliminary drawings for these grisailles. So the decision to include flaws must have been made late in the creative process, and may be another example of input from a number of people, or maybe Pitcairn himself seeing another opportunity for a spiritual message in natural occurrence. Do you see what I'm talking about? Was that clear? All right. My class noticed 3 other places in the nave that have similar progressions, disguised symbolism. I invite you to go to the cathedral and find them. A hint for visitors: look at the floor. For those who attend church in the cathedral, sit in the back pew on the south side, and during the interlude, not during the sermon, look to your left. So in closing, Ralph Adams Cram was accurate when he described the working processes at Bryn Athyn Cathedral to the American Association of Architects. The multiplication of drawings, the introduction of models of everything, the acceptance of suggestions from every source, the determining of nothing until it had been meticulously scrutinized. These working methods were the norm at Bryn Athyn Cathedral and Glencairn. They are unmedieval and unorthodox from an architect's point of view. And yet, the combination of purposeful design in the service of religion, raw materials of the highest order, the free exchange of ideas, and the nurturing of fine craftsmanship was certainly not a catastrophe. Thank you.